A pregnant woman's life hangs in the balance on an ordinary afternoon in suburban Ohio. As she collapses on her front porch, gasping for breath, a 4-year-old German shepherd named Max refuses to leave her side. What happens next will change everything. This is the incredible true story of how one dog's unwavering loyalty saved not one life, but 2. Stay tuned to discover how Max became a hero when his family needed him most. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of courage and compassion. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Sarah Mitchell had always been a planner. At 32 years old, she had meticulously organized every detail of her pregnancy, from prenatal vitamins to the nursery that sat waiting in her home. Her husband, David, worked long hours as an engineer, and Sarah had taken a leave of absence from her marketing job to prepare for motherhood. She was now 8 months pregnant, and everything was supposed to go smoothly. Her obstetrician had assured her that her pregnancy was textbook perfect. No complications, no concerns, just a healthy baby boy on the way. Max had come into their lives 4 years earlier, a bundle of energy and unconditional love. The German shepherd had been a shelter rescue, a dog nobody wanted because of his anxious temperament and fear-based behaviors. But Sarah saw something in him that others had missed. She spent months working with a trainer, building his confidence, teaching him that the world was safe. Max transformed from a trembling, withdrawn dog into a devoted family member. He followed Sarah everywhere around the house, resting his head on her lap while she worked from home, and sleeping at the foot of her bed at night. Their bond was unshakable. On a Thursday afternoon in late September, Sarah decided to water the plants on her front porch. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that made you grateful to be alive. The sun was warm on her face, and she could feel the baby moving inside her. She was thinking about names, about what her son might look like, about the future that stretched out before her. Max was, as always, right beside her, his presence a comforting constant. Then everything changed in an instant. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her abdomen, more intense than anything she had experienced before. It wasn't the Braxton Hicks contractions she had been warned about. This was different. This was terrifying. She gasped, doubling over, and the watering can fell from her hands. Max immediately sensed that something was wrong. His body stiffened, and he pressed against her legs, whining softly. Sarah tried to steady herself, gripping the porch railing. The pain intensified, radiating through her lower back and abdomen. She knew, with a clarity born of fear, that something was seriously wrong with her pregnancy. She needed help. She needed David. She needed a hospital. But as she tried to straighten up, another wave of pain crashed through her, and her vision began to blur. Max barked, a sound Sarah had rarely heard him make. It wasn't his usual greeting bark. It was urgent, almost frantic. He pawed at her leg, trying to push her toward the door. Sarah understood that he was trying to help her, but she couldn't move. Her legs felt weak, unreliable. She sank to the porch steps, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She reached for her phone in her pocket, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She needed to call David, needed to call 911, needed someone to help her. But the pain was so intense that she could barely think straight. Max continued to bark, circling her, his instincts screaming that his beloved human was in danger. Sarah managed to unlock her phone with trembling fingers. She was about to dial when another contraction, or whatever this was, seized her body. She cried out, unable to help herself. The phone slipped from her hand and fell onto the porch. Max immediately moved toward it, sniffing at it. And then he did something extraordinary. He grabbed the phone in his mouth and brought it back to Sarah, dropping it gently in her lap. Sarah stared at the phone, stunned. She had never trained Max to do anything like that. It was pure instinct, pure love, pure desperation to help. With tears streaming down her face, she managed to dial 911. Her voice was shaky as she told the dispatcher where she was, what was happening, that she was pregnant and something was very wrong. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way. But Max wasn't done. As Sarah sat on the porch steps, trying to breathe through the pain, Max did something that would later be described as nothing short of miraculous. He positioned himself so that his body was pressed against hers, supporting her, keeping her from falling backward. He rested his head on her shoulder, and his calm presence began to soothe her panic. His steady breathing, his warm body, his unwavering loyalty, all of it combined to anchor Sarah to the present moment, to give her something to hold on to besides fear. She wrapped one arm around Max's neck, burying her face in his fur, and waited for the ambulance. She didn't know what was happening to her baby. She didn't know if everything would be okay, but she knew that she wasn't alone. Max was there, and Max would not let her fall. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, though to Sarah it felt like an eternity. The paramedics rushed up the driveway, their equipment in hand, their faces all business and professionalism. They immediately began assessing her condition, asking rapid-fire questions about her symptoms, her medical history, when the pain had started. Sarah answered as best she could, her arm still wrapped around Max's neck. The dog hadn't moved from her side, his presence an unwavering anchor in the chaos. One of the paramedics, a woman named Jennifer with kind eyes and gray streaking through her dark hair, noticed Max and approached cautiously. "We need to get your dog inside," she said gently. Sarah shook her head, unable to speak, as another wave of pain washed over her. Jennifer seemed to understand, without further explanation. She nodded to her partner, and together they carefully lifted Sarah onto a stretcher, with Max walking alongside them, never breaking contact with his owner at http://owner.8. The hospital, the emergency room staff was equally accommodating about Max. There was some initial resistance, hospital policy about animals, but Sarah's desperate pleas and the paramedics' insistence that the dog was providing crucial emotional support swayed them. A nurse named Marcus found a quiet corner of the waiting room where Max could stay, and he brought the dog water and a blanket. Max curled up on the blanket, his eyes tracking Sarah as she was wheeled away for urgent examination. The diagnosis came quickly and with terrifying clarity: placental abruption. Part of Sarah's placenta had separated from the uterine wall, a complication that was dangerous for both mother and baby. The baby was in distress. The doctors explained that they needed to perform an emergency cesarean section immediately. There was no time for the careful planning Sarah had done, no time for the birth plan she had written out and shared with her doctors. This was life or death, for her and for her son. Sarah's mind raced with fear and uncertainty. She thought of David, still at work, unaware that his world was about to change. She thought of the baby, fighting for his life inside her womb. And she thought of Max, waiting in that hospital room, probably confused and scared, wondering why his beloved human had left him. She asked the nurse if someone could stay with Max, could reassure him that she would be okay. Marcus promised he would personally check on the dog. The surgery was scheduled for 45 minutes later. Sarah was prepped, given medications to stabilize her and the baby, and wheeled into the operating room. The last thing she saw before the anesthesia took hold was David's face. He had arrived just in time, his expression a mixture of fear and fierce determination. He squeezed her hand and whispered, "You're going to be okay. Our baby is going to be okay. I promise." Then everything went black. 2 hours later, Sarah woke to the sound of a baby crying. For a moment, she couldn't place the sound, couldn't understand where she was or what had happened. Then memory flooded back, and with it came a rush of emotion so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. The baby was crying, which meant the baby was alive. The baby was breathing. The baby had made it through. A nurse appeared at her bedside, smiling. "Congratulations, Mama. You have a beautiful baby boy. He's healthy, strong lungs as you can hear, and he's perfect. Your husband is with him right now in the nursery." Sarah tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The surgery had left her weak and sore, and the anesthesia still clouded her thinking. But none of that mattered. Her baby was alive. She had made it through. They both had. Had it. Took several hours before Sarah was stable enough to hold her son. When she finally did, when she finally felt the weight of him in her arms, felt his tiny fingers wrap around hers, she wept. David stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and he wept, too. They had come so close to tragedy, and instead they had been given this miracle. Their son, whom they named Lucas, was perfect in every way. But Sarah's first thought, as she held Lucas for the first time, was of Max. She asked David about the dog, and David told her what had happened. He explained how Max had stayed in the waiting room, how the dog had refused to eat or drink, how he had paced back and forth, clearly distressed. He described how Marcus, the kind nurse, had sat with Max and talked to him, explaining that Sarah was going to be okay, that she would be back soon, and somehow Max seemed to understand. When the nurses finally brought Max into the recovery room to meet Sarah and Lucas, the dog's transformation was immediate and profound. His tail wagged so hard, his entire back end moved with it. He approached the bed carefully, as if understanding that Sarah was fragile, and he rested his chin gently on the mattress. Sarah reached down and stroked his head, tears streaming down her face. Max had saved her life, not in the dramatic, heroic way that people usually think of rescue dogs, but in the quiet, steady way that comes from pure love and instinct. He had known something was wrong, and he had refused to abandon her. He had been her anchor when she was drowning in fear. The days following Lucas's birth were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. Sarah spent her time between recovering from surgery and bonding with her newborn son. The hospital staff marveled at her resilience, at the way she pushed through the pain to be present for Lucas, to feed him, to hold him, to whisper promises about the life they would build together. But there was something else that kept her going, something that gave her strength beyond what she thought she possessed. Max. The dog had become a fixture in the hospital room. The initial resistance from hospital administration had completely dissolved once they witnessed the profound effect Max had on Sarah's recovery. When she was in pain, Max would rest his head on her bed, his presence a silent comfort. When she was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of new motherhood, Max would curl up beside her, his steady breathing a reminder that she wasn't alone. The nurses began to joke that Max was more effective than any pain medication they could administer. David watched his wife and his dog with a sense of awe and gratitude that he struggled to put into words. He had always known that Max was special, but he hadn't fully understood the depth of the bond between Sarah and the dog until he witnessed it in those hospital days. He saw how Max's presence calmed Sarah when she was anxious, how the dog seemed to instinctively know when she needed comfort and when she needed space. He understood, in a way he never had before, that Max hadn't just saved Sarah's life on that September afternoon. The dog was continuing to save her, day after day, in the small, quiet ways that matter most. On the 5th day after Lucas's birth, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. The doctors had given her strict instructions about recovery. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity, plenty of rest. Sarah nodded along, but her mind was already racing ahead to home, to settling into a routine with Lucas, to introducing her baby to the life that awaited him. As she was wheeled out of the hospital, Lucas bundled in her arms and David pushing the wheelchair, Max walked alongside them, his tail wagging with unmistakable joy. He seemed to understand that they were all going home together. The first weeks at home were challenging in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Newborns are demanding creatures, and Lucas was no exception. He cried at odd hours, needed to be fed every 2 to 3 hours, and seemed to have his days and nights completely reversed. Sarah found herself exhausted in a way she had never experienced before. Her body ached from the surgery. Her emotions were all over the place due to hormonal changes, and the sleep deprivation was beginning to take its toll. There were moments when she felt completely overwhelmed, moments when she wondered if she was cut out for motherhood. http motherhood.it was during one of these particularly difficult nights that Max proved himself to be more than just a pet. Sarah was sitting in the nursery at 2 a.m, trying to soothe a crying Lucas, feeling tears streaming down her own face because she didn't know what else to do. Max appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by some invisible call. He approached slowly and carefully, and he rested his chin on the edge of the crib, looking down at the crying baby. Then he did something that would have seemed impossible if Sarah hadn't witnessed it with her own eyes. Max began to hum, a low, gentle vocalization that was neither quite a whine nor quite a growl, but something in between. The sound was soothing, almost musical. Lucas, who had been crying inconsolably just moments before, began to quiet. His cries became whimpers, and then they stopped altogether. The baby's eyes, which had been squeezed shut in distress, opened and focused on Max. For a long moment, Baby and dog regarded each other, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had both just entered this world and were trying to figure out how to navigate it. Sarah sat in that dark nursery, watching her son and her dog, and she wept. These were different tears than before, though. Tears of gratitude, of wonder, of relief. Max had done it again. He had known exactly what was needed, and he had provided it without hesitation or expectation of reward. This was love in its purest form, unfiltered and unconditional as HTTP:// unconditional. As the weeks turned into months, Max became an integral part of Lucas's life. The dog was there for every milestone, the first smile, the first time Lucas grabbed Max's fur, which the patient dog tolerated with remarkable gentleness. The first time Lucas laughed at something Max did. Max seemed to take his role as protector and companion to the baby with the utmost seriousness. He slept outside Lucas's nursery, alert to any sound. He was gentle but vigilant, a guardian angel in the form of a 4-year-old German shepherd. Sarah often thought about what might have happened if she hadn't adopted Max from that shelter all those years ago. What if she had chosen a different dog, or no dog at all? What if Max hadn't been there on that September afternoon? The thought was too terrible to contemplate. Max hadn't just saved her life. He had saved the life of her son, had given Lucas the gift of knowing his mother, of growing up with her presence and her love. And he had given Sarah the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she was never truly alone, that she had a faithful companion who would stand by her no matter what. Years passed, and the bond between Max, Sarah, and Lucas only grew stronger. Lucas grew from a newborn into a toddler, then into a curious, energetic boy with his father's intelligence and his mother's compassion. And through every stage of his development, Max was there. The dog had become more than just a pet. He was Lucas's first friend, his protector, his constant companion. They would play together in the backyard, Max always careful to be gentle despite his size. They would nap together on lazy Sunday afternoons, Lucas's small body curled against Max's warm fur. They would sit together on the porch steps, watching the world go by, two souls who had bonded before Lucas could even speak. Sarah often marveled at how different her life could have been. If Max hadn't been there that day on the porch, if he hadn't sensed her distress and alerted her to call for help, if he hadn't provided comfort and stability during her darkest moment, everything would have been different. She might not have survived the placental abruption. Lucas might never have been born. The family that she and David had built together might never have existed. The thought was almost too much to bear, and it filled her with a gratitude so profound that it sometimes brought her to tears. When Lucas was 5 years old, Sarah decided to share their story publicly. She wrote about Max in a blog post, detailing everything that had happened on that September afternoon, the emergency surgery, the recovery, and the years that followed. She wrote about how a dog from a shelter, a dog that nobody had wanted, had become the hero of her family's story. She wrote about the power of unconditional love, about the bond that can form between humans and animals, about second chances and redemption. The blog post went viral. Within days, it had been shared thousands of times. People from all over the world reached out to Sarah, telling her their own stories of dogs who had saved their lives or changed their families forever. News outlets picked up the story, and soon Sarah found herself being interviewed on local television and radio stations. She became an advocate for shelter dog adoption, using her platform to encourage people to give rescue dogs a chance, just as she had given Max a chance all those years ago. Max became something of a local celebrity. Children would recognize him when Sarah walked him around the neighborhood and would ask to pet him. People would stop her on the street to thank her for sharing their story, to tell her how it had inspired them to adopt a rescue dog of their own. Max, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention, though he was always most content, simply being with his family, doing the quiet, everyday things that made up their lives together. But as the years continued to pass, Max began to slow down. He was 13 years old now, which is advanced for a German shepherd. His muzzle had turned gray, and he moved with less of the fluid grace that had characterized his younger years. He spent more time sleeping, and his energy levels were not what they once were. Sarah noticed these changes with a bittersweet ache in her heart. She knew that Max's time with them was finite, that eventually she would have to say goodbye to the dog who had saved her life and been such an integral part of her family's story. One autumn afternoon, when the leaves were turning gold and red, Sarah sat on the front porch with Max just as they had so many times before. Lucas, now 10 years old, was at school. David was at work. It was just Sarah and Max, as it had been on that fateful September day so many years ago. Sarah ran her fingers through Max's graying fur and thought about everything they had been through together. She thought about the moment he had brought her phone to her, about his steady presence during her recovery, about the way he had hummed to calm Lucas on that difficult night, about every moment of love and loyalty he had shown her. "Thank you," she whispered to the dog, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for being there for me. Thank you for being the best friend I could ever ask for." Max turned his head and looked at her, his dark eyes still sharp and intelligent despite his age. He rested his chin on her lap, and Sarah felt tears slide down her cheeks. She didn't know how much longer she would have with him, but she knew that every moment was precious. Every moment was a gift. That evening, Sarah called David and Lucas into the living room. She told them that she wanted to create a more permanent tribute to Max, something that would honor his memory and his incredible legacy. She wanted to establish a scholarship fund in Max's name for students studying veterinary medicine or animal behavior. She wanted to create a documentary about their story, to share it with an even wider audience. She wanted to make sure that Max's impact on their lives and on the lives of so many others would never be forgotten. David and Lucas both agreed enthusiastically. Over the following months, the family worked together to bring these plans to life. They created the Max Foundation, dedicated to supporting rescue dogs and promoting adoption from shelters. They filmed interviews and gathered photographs and home videos. They reached out to the doctors and nurses who had cared for Sarah during her medical crisis, asking them to share their perspectives on Max's role in her recovery. The documentary premiered at a local film festival and was later picked up by a streaming service. It reached millions of viewers around the world. People cried while watching it. People were inspired by it. People adopted rescue dogs because of it. And through it all, Max remained exactly what he had always been, a loyal, loving companion who asked for nothing more than to be near his family. And to HTP Taos, family in. The end. Max's story is not just about a dog saving a human life, though it is certainly that. It is about the power of love, the importance of second chances, and the incredible bonds that can form between humans and animals. It is about a family that was nearly torn apart by tragedy, but was held together by the unwavering loyalty of a four-legged friend. It is about how sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, adopting a rescue dog, giving an anxious animal a chance, can have the most profound and far-reaching consequences. Max's legacy lives on in the lives he touched, in the families who adopted rescue dogs because of his story, and in the hearts of everyone who has heard about the brave K9 who saved a pregnant woman and, in doing so, saved an entire family.